to welcome our guest speaker, John Wunderlich. He's a socialist and data activist who publishes at mydata.org. Please welcome John.
I always take the microphone. Never know who's hard of hearing in the...
That's right.
So, what did you think of the film? How many of you have a smartphone on you right now? Okay, so we're now, should they choose to, we're all in the same place. Two things when I watched the film again this afternoon and just now I wanted to put in your head, maybe three. One, the issue is political economy. It's not technology. Right? There's a lot of this is technology running through this these kinds of film or these kinds of movements, but it's not about the technology. It's about the political economy, and particularly the political economy of capitalism. So bearing that in mind, what is the internet? Right? We saw that right at the front of the film when we saw that basement. It was heavy industrial power usage, locked doors. The internet is a major industrial investment, and it's almost entirely privately owned. It's not a public utility. It's a profit-generating enterprise. So it's not a public space. It's a private space, end to end to end. Second thing I want you to remember is when they say they sell your data, they don't. They make money off your data, but any organization, any commercial entity that has your data isn't going to sell it to anyone else. They're going to sell the analysis of your data, predictions about what you do about your data, but they're not going to give up the goose that continues to lay the golden egg. So just as ProPublica in the States tried to buy ads successfully on Facebook that said, we'd like to identify Nazi people to sell these ads to, and were able to buy those ads. They didn't identify who those people were. Facebook did that for them. They would only identify those people if they clicked on the ad and then connected. So remember those two things, political economy, or three things, political economy, the internet is privately owned and it's not a public space, and the data stays in the hands of the feudal lords of data. So is privacy dead? So coincidentally, as of today, November the 1st, this is the first year anniversary of a change in the federal privacy law in Canada, whereby the Privacy Commissioner of Canada made it mandatory for private organizations that are covered by the privacy law in Canada for commercial entities to mandatorily report breaches that had a significant risk of harm. There's a whole technical stuff behind that. So they got 680 breach reports this year, which is a six-fold increase over the year before when it was voluntary, so hello. And 28 million Canadians were affected by those breaches. And you can see that slightly more than the majority were the base of unauthorized access. So people who had access to the data, I got access to it, so it could be employees, it could be hacks, but that is exactly what you would fear to do. This is the only industry, IT, where they test it on the users. They call themselves engineers, but have you ever seen a bridge beta tested? Have you ever seen a car beta tested? Well, let's release it and see how many accidents happen, and we'll fix the next version. That's essentially how computer software is released. So what are the tips from the Privacy Commissioner? Know where your data is. Good luck with that. Anybody here have a smart thermostat in their house, like a Nest or one of those other internet-connected thermostats? Sorry, go back. Know where your data is. It's impossible. If you have a Nest thermometer, you'll see if you've seen ads for those smart ones. An academic did the research and said there's so many back-end connections between Nest and the various suppliers that you would have to read approximately 1,000 privacy policies to understand what's happening with your data just from using a Nest thermometer. know your vulnerabilities, and I'll get back to that later, and be aware of breaches. So, in other words, it's on you, right? You're just cast adrift in this sea. Go ahead, next one. Oh, back one. There we go. So should we listen to the hackers, right? That's what it said at the start, right? So who remembers the Arab Spring, all the this Facebook revolution, right? So I remember talking to a reporter in D.C. a little bit after that, in 2011, 2012, and she was just angry with the way that the regional head of Facebook, or was Google, I think, said, you know, this was the result of this technology. This technology made this possible. And she said, you know, people have been organizing in Egypt against the dictatorship, against the authoritarianism for 20 years. Facebook was a way to enable the communication that these people did and facilitated aspects of it. But you don't have something like the Arab Spring spring up because of some technology. And the second map down there from the Economist shows the current state of democracy in the Middle East, with the only one that shows up as not authoritarian or dictatorial is Tunisia, which had an election fairly recently. So beware of technologies, especially, and this is rampant in Silicon Valley, Techno Libertarianism, which is this sort of abhorrent variant of libertarianism. They talk about minimizing government regulation, the free web, the free as in Libre, not free as in gratis, that you saw Stallman talking about, market solutions, and it's deeply meritocratic. It's not egalitarian, it's not built on solidarity, it's deeply meritocratic and hierarchical. Now, the cypherpunk movement, when you saw Ian and some other people, focused on the privacy of communications, anonymity and pseudonyms. It's anti-censorship, and it talks about hide the hiding. That's technologically a progressive, but it's only a technology. It doesn't grasp the political economy of what underlies this. Go ahead. So what are we talking about with surveillance and activism? That's a long quote from George Orwell. Normally I think Brave New World, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, is a better dystopian representation of what we're dealing with right now. But you saw towards the end of the film all the facial recognition going on, and there's a lot of stuff in the news about facial recognition these days. And it turns out in Newspeak, how many people are familiar with the concept of Newspeak in Orwell? So the Newspeak is face crime, which is to say betraying something in your face. If somebody looks at you and sees that you're not enthusiastic about the latest virtue signaling from Prime Minister Trudeau, you've committed a face crime and you could be recorded for that. And that represents the chilling effect, the self-censoring, the changes that we internalize, the internal alienation that we undergo when mass surveillance inhibits us. Think about how many of you are, it's the usual mixed age, but if you're a younger person in university today and you think you're an activist, what do you think that's going to do? Or if you're on Facebook, what is that going to do for your chances of getting a job in your chosen area? Now, it's fine if you're a radical sociologist and you're aiming to be a professor in a university, that may be good. But if you're a biologist, but you're also politically active, how likely are you to get a job because you're politically active? Facebook, employers look at social media. Right? So when you're organizing an event, you're putting at risk the futures of all the young people that participate in your event. So Facebook is a wonderful tool for organizing and reaching community. It's also a wonderful tool for betraying to the other side who your community is. Right? So surveillance is inherently built into these social networking tools. And that means your activism on those tools is much more public than you might be thinking. And that has consequences. And I've had talks with a number of unions about, if you're going to organize, do it in such a way that you are not stripping yourself of the next generation of activists for your organization. It's even worse in other countries. If you look at the Philippines with Duterte, or if you look at Myanmar with the Rohingya, these are both countries where Facebook introduced what they call Facebook Basics. We don't know about here, but in those countries, Facebook went to the country and said, we'll provide free internet to your population through Facebook. So for a large part of those countries' populations, the only internet they know is Facebook, because if it's not on Facebook, they have to pay extra for the data access. These are poor people that don't have that money. Facebook uses engagement as, who's heard of the term engagement as what drives? So what happens on Facebook, we don't know what the algorithms are, but we know what they want to do is they want to keep you glued to that screen, whether it's YouTube or Facebook or any of those other properties. When you see the up next in YouTube or what's coming on your data feed in Facebook, they're trying to say, oh, you clicked on this. What's going to make you stay and look at this? And it turns out that engagement, the best thing that makes you engage is something that makes you angry, right? That drives you to the extremes. And so what does that mean in Myanmar? That means that Buddhist anti-Muslim activists were able to circulate stories about Rohingyas that led to escalating violence against the Rohingya population in Myanmar. In the Philippines, Duterte hired people who were very familiar with Facebook, or Facebook embedded people with his campaign. And you're familiar with Duterte's message about going after the drug dealers and the hate that he's proposed. So when people talk about Cambridge Analytica and fake news, that's not a bug of Facebook. That's the way it's designed. Those are not anomalies. And when the massively undereducated in any kind of humanities, Mark Zuckerberg gets in front of a crowd, he's gone through this before. Oh, we didn't think of this, we apologize, we'll try and do better. And they do it all over again. How many times have we seen him rinse and repeat this same tired story? Eventually, it'll catch on. Go ahead, next one. So, what is surveillance capitalism? It made, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, Zubov's book out last year, made a lot of headlines. But remember that Shoshana Zuboff is a business professor at Harvard, and she's basically a business sociologist, and she's not challenging capitalism with her book on surveillance capitalism. The dynamic of surveillance capitalism is to surveil people to be better for capitalism. So it's a very interesting history of how companies like Google or Facebook came to be how they were. But if you want a better view of surveillance capitalism, 2014 issue of Monthly Review provides a much better and deeper perspective on what that term means. I recommend starting with that rather than Zubov's 700-page book. But surveillance capitalism, go ahead, talks about personal data as an asset, right? The Economist on the right there says the world's most valuable resource is no longer oil but data. But what does that mean for the organic form of capital or the formation of capital? Those of you that have studied Marx will know the MCM versus CMC version of capital, commodity. In sort of primitive markets or normal markets, you have a commodity. I bake some bread because I'm a miller. I sell it in the market, and then I use the money to buy another commodity. That's sort of the standard, what people think of as market commodity. But what capitalism does, chapter 4 of Capital, talks about the money, commodity, money. That you start with money, you go through a commodity to generate more money, and that's the form of capital. So in this case, money is investment capital, or for startups, or in terms of Google, it's the advertising money that comes in. The commodity is the personal data, or what they call the social graph, which is to say all of your connections, the people you know, all the stuff that were in the Stasi files. That's your social graph, right? That's what the secret police look for, that kind of information, or what some people disingenuously call metadata. Well, we don't want to see, we don't want to hear your telephone call. All we're looking at is the metadata, who you talk to, when you talk to them, and how often you talk to them. And then that is then turned into return on investment, or most perniciously, behavioral changes. Advertising that nudges you, political campaigns that nudge you to make different behaviors than you would otherwise do it. In other words, your behavior is now part of the formation of capital. It's not enough that you're alienated at the point of production when you're at work. You're now alienated every time you interact with because your own behavior becomes part of the commodification. So even when you're a knowledge worker, this alienation happens all the time. So how do you get it back? Information security. Start to practice until we are able to organize to push back and get better regulations, get better control of this, and set up a context where the internet is a public utility, it is a commons under collective control. That's the job of organizing, but in the meantime, you need to practice your own information security. So I'll end with this. Go ahead, next one. Some references, and I gave them a PDF of these decks, but there's a Citizen Lab here in Toronto has something called a securityplanner.org, and we'll leave that up so people can get the, which will walk you through how to do your own security. The Tactical Technology Collective out of Berlin provides a lot of tools for human rights workers and others. I have a USB stick. If you've got a computer here, I can give you a copy of this. Privacy International, an international organization of the UK that does a lot of work. My Data Global, based in Helsinki, is another NGO. Open Media, an NGO here in Canada. If you want to buy hardware that's built for privacy, Purism, Proton Mail, ExpressVPN, Exit. Anyway, that's all available, and I can talk about that later if you want. But again, it's not the technology, it's the political economy. Your data's not for sale, you're for sale, and until we can organize, you have to look after yourself. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, John. So folks, what we're going to do now is we're going to do questions or comments, and I think we'll do, usually we'll do 5 or 6 questions or comments and come back to John. He'll answer them. We'll have a few minutes, and we'll kind of do that a few times. So so I will aim for a gender balanced list, and then we'll come back to John. So if you have any questions or comments, just put your hand up and I'll put a list together. Go ahead.
Yes, my name is Don. I'm retired. I'm not plugged in anywhere as far as I know. I don't have a screen. I don't have a computer. I don't have a cell phone. I don't have a mobile phone. I don't have anything in my apartment that's smarter than me. Where the hell am I vulnerable? Now, the question that comes to mind is photo recognition. Can I be picked out in a crowd just by my photo and then tracked indefinitely based on that stored information of my face? That's my question.
Okay, great. Someone in the back there? Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to know how to obtain that technology to attach to my phone, to protect me. You know? Any kind of technology along that line. Not a smartphone, but I'd like to be protected when I'm not using it. I'd like to be shut off when it really is shut off. Thanks.
Anyone else? Go ahead, yep.
I just wondered about security breaches, because I've had 2 already. I'm just wondering if I should be worried about that.
Yep.
I'm Simon. I've studied like graphic design and like programming a while ago, but I have a bunch of friends also that are like programmer, and a lot of time I've heard like Tor has been like hacked, I mean, but it's not as safe as it was before. And is it true? Like, yeah, this is basically the question.
So we'll do another round, or I have a question or comment. So I'd like to know, I mean, we can understand you talked about, you know, how essentially the information that's gathered is almost like a commodity that is being created. I'd heard recent statistics that the value attached to gathering this data creates more revenue than the carbon industry, petrocarbon industry. What would an internet look like in a socialist society? What would the difference be in a socialist society as opposed to the capitalist one that we're living in today? Yep, I think we're gonna do one more and then we're gonna go back to John because they're kind of fast and furious, these questions. Go ahead.
Just now you mentioned that metadata is a disingenuous term. I'm wondering if you could create your own term, what term would you use and why?
Okay. Okay, John.
All right, thanks. So Don, you're not plugged in, but for example, Facebook has something called shadow profiles. So I'm not asking, but if I assume that you have a family and you've got grandchildren, and your grandchildren are active on Facebook and they take pictures of you, or you have friends that are active. If you have no friends and nobody talks about you on anything and you're a hermit, you're okay. But if you're a normal human being, that means that you're connected to other people, a number of whom are likely to be on Facebook or other social networks, and Facebook will have a shadow profile of you. And so that if you ever do connect, they'll already know stuff about you. So
Well, how do they get the shadow profile?
because your friends talk about you, you'll be posted, if they post pictures of you, if they talk about you, if there's an event where you're at, and so forth and so on. So it may be, in your case, if you are a hermit and antisocial, and good on you if you are, it's probably a pretty faint shadow. But for if my grandchildren were active on Facebook and I'm active on Facebook, I was doing work with the Price Commissioner in 2006. I was actually on Facebook before my daughter was, which creeped her and her friends out a little bit, but that's a different story. But yeah, so they're actively gleaning information about what they directly get, but also what they can buy. Do you have a credit card? If you use a credit card, if you get billed, if you have any kind of utility, there's a whole raft of information about you that data brokers are exchanging and that Facebook will use to make a profile of you. That's what's so pernicious about it. Attaching a tech to the phone. Well, there's some simple things. That PUR.ISM that I talked about earlier is a startup company that produces laptops and phones that are built from the ground up. If you look here on my iPad, you can get these all over the place. I have a little slider over the phone, over the camera, and those are fairly common. But unless you buy, or you can buy, if you look at if you go on your favorite online shopping site or go to an electronics store and ask for a look for a Faraday cage for your phone, it's basically a metal mesh bag. You drop your phone in, cuts it off, and that will effectively do the same thing as what that technology did.
Can you say the goal again, please? Where?
Well, just go on your favorite online shopping or an electronics store and ask for a Faraday bag for your phone,
Okay.
right? So you can You can get little RFID pouches for your credit cards so they can't be read. It's relatively cheap and relatively simple just to do that. If you were going to carry a man purse or a bag, you can get some of those. Will have metal linings to protect you. So there are options. You don't have to go with a big fancy, bulky cover up like that. Just wrap it in tin foil. Worst comes to worst. Not aluminum foil. Not aluminum foil. Tin foil. Security burst. What to worry about? Well, kind of what you heard about here is not just the things that you do or what goes on the back end. It's who you're sharing your data with and why. So yes, you should be worried, but you shouldn't be paranoid. The power over you is as much a function of how much you're worried about it as what's actually going on. If you think about the traditional human existence in a village, you know, for the 80 to 50,000 years since we've been Homo sapiens and congregated in small to large groups, for most of our history, most of the people we know way too much about us anyway, right? If you think about village life or life at work, so there's a lot of shared information in those circles. So, but there's also a long history of a culture of respecting. If you share information, but if you and I shared information, there's some social boundaries about what the expectations are, and we haven't yet built those kind of respect for privacy into our technology or into the culture of the technologists. Too many technologists, to overstate a cliche, are like Sheldon on The Big Bang Theory and really don't get what this stuff is about, and they build that into the technology. So yes, you should be worried, but worry mostly about the things that are actually important to you. So your financial information, like bank account information, use a VPN, like I use ExpressVPN. I think that's a good one, but don't use a free VPN, just like duh. If you want to use a VPN, use one that pays. And you know, like a retail store accepts a certain amount of shoplifting or shrinkage as part of operations, just going through daily life, there's going to be minor security and privacy breaches that happen all the time. That's the world we live in. Don't get too paranoid about it, but pay attention to your credit card bills. And ex-boyfriends, if you're female, there's a whole different set of issues related to that. Simon, graphic design, Tor not as safe as it. You saw the graphic of the three jumps. Now there's traffic analysis that researchers have done, looking at exit nodes on Tor. So the Tor server where you come out is called an exit node. And so if they're looking at you or at traffic going to a particular site, there's traffic analysis they can do that says, oh, it comes out at this time and this person was at this place. They can start to do, given it bulk surveillance, they can start to do correlations. It's also the case that it's mainly pseudonymous. So if you do something over and over again, right, it's, if I go to the same store and talk to the clerk at the store, they'll recognize my face, but they won't know who I am. But if they're behind me at the bank and they hear me announce my name at the bank, all of a sudden, that one encounter, they now know who I am and can correlate that. So it's the same thing with any of these pseudonymous networks. You have to be really diligent about keeping your transactions separate. A side note is, Tor was originally funded by the US Navy as a way for secure communications for their spies in the Soviet Union, but that's a different story. Julius, information as commodity, what would a socialist internet look like? That's as amorphous a question as what would socialism look like. One of the things, and I've done I've been engaged a little bit with the Block Sidewalk people, and I've talked to Sidewalk Labs a bit. We talk about worker co-ops as one of the ways of organizing alternatives to capitalism at the point of production in terms of labor, but there's also the possibility of data co-ops, where if your data, rather than having your data reside with Facebook, maybe you and other people that think like you, just like you would go to a credit union rather than a bank, because the credit union matches your values in terms of how they invest your money, you could become part of a data trust that has your data and then chooses who to share it with and what to share it with on terms that make sense to you. So I know some startups that are working along the same ideas to think that if you want to sell your data, if somebody's going to make money on it, it might as well be me, as some people have. So last number I heard, the average revenue per user that Facebook uses for North American users is about $55. But this startup that will offer your data for research or other things with your permission, thinks that you can get hundreds, possibly thousands of dollars a year off of uses of your data. So I think a socialist internet would be more diverse, not as centralized, and would be there would be some element of democratization and control. How that's actually going to work out, I think that's going to it's going to vary. And metadata. What term would I use for metadata? Good question. I would say it's my. I'd probably use two things. It's digital, and it's my. I don't want to be metaphysical, but it's soul is probably the best word that it would have to be, because it tells you everything you need to know about me without actually knowing me. Right. So the metadata, the full panoply of metadata, basically reveals who I am in the context of all my connections with other people. Right? It doesn't necessarily know who I am as a person inside, but it situates me precisely in the context of society, friends, and all the people that I hold dear. And that's pretty scary.
Thanks, John. Okay, we're going to do another round. So if you haven't spoken, if you want to have any questions or comments, just put up your hand. If you have not spoken, okay, in the back, Raj, go ahead.
Maybe a little comment, may not be a question.
Speak up a little bit. Sure.
Maybe comment, not a question. It's more online with what Julia's question. So what I understand about internet is that its origin itself has got issues. Actually, it's a military-funded technology. It originated because supercomputers were expensive, and we cannot fund it. American military cannot fund it. So they have to use the computing power of different universities, and they have the interconnectivity. So fundamentally, it's a Bush technology. It comes from that. So then later it evolved. Once the requirement has changed, and it started expanding, it passed through different stages. Right? So that is why you told one interesting point. If data has to go to Ecuador, it has to go through Miami, because in the fundamental building, when it evolved itself, there are problems actually. There are design issues, or its feature itself is like that. That is more known to the people who involved in the beginning actually, so they can control it nicely. And the later, Linux kind of software, operating systems are open sources, but it could not capture the market. We know the whole history. We cannot talk all those things in detail. The way Microsoft captured the market, killing all other technologies, and spreadsheet like Excel, all those things, they purchased and made it as a package of their stuff and Microsoft Office was marketed. The way the things are evolved, my point is that actually, how to put it, the hackers are not heroes. They are actually creating havoc. It's something like a society, we are unhappy in a capitalist society. We cannot depend too much on anarchists. We love them, they challenge the capitalist system. Same way hackers are heroes for us. It gives some hope actually. But we have to, in factory, GM factory, we have to, workers has to capture the factory and control the production or bring the green technology. It's the right way actually. Instead of demolishing all the GM factory, if we advise to start a small scale industry, it will not help actually.
30
So the
seconds.
existing internet, how we can capture and control. This should be the thought of socialism. So that's the way things should move. That's my point actually. See, for example, case of recently, internet, how China and India recently uses it. India used it, shutting down the internet in Kashmir when they started attacking Kashmir. So they used it in a wrong way actually. See how it is done. Rather in China, many of the internet facilities, the good things, good websites, that you download the data, it is completely free. I'm not a great supporter of China. Still, they have the legacy of a working class society. So rather the more entertainment, more that kind of websites are more blocked. So that is how. So the controlling has got an importance. So how it is controlled for the society or against the society? And the human history, whatever we created, this great product which evolved in the history, internet, we cannot only dismantle it, but how we will capture it. That should be the
Thank
thought
you.
of socialism.
Thank you, Conrad. Okay. Next person is Corey.
Yeah, I'm on Facebook quite a bit actually, and I was wondering if you know of any other like open source social media that's out there. I thought about this a lot, and I haven't. I'm on Facebook a lot, and I was wondering if there was an open source social media that was available out there, and also if you know if there's one of those antenna programs in Toronto, because I thought that was quite interesting. I mean, with what Mirage was saying, I think it's very important that we would democratize the internet. Right, but in the meantime, there are things that we can do to help protect ourselves and create a more open and secure environment. And I was also wondering, especially because you've done work with Sidewalk Labs, or at least talked to people who've worked in Sidewalks Lab, what are some of the major issues that you see coming out of Sidewalks Labs? I recently saw an article talking about when the program began, sort of the goal of Alphabet in creating a smart, very private city where they would have their own private police force, collect all their data and store it privately. And so I know that they've sort of walked back on that, but you might have some more information on that, and I'd like to know. Thank you.
Is there any other first-time speakers? Any other first-time speakers? No? Okay, second round. Go ahead. 2 minutes.
Any less. I'd just like to recommend a book I recently read by Edward J. Snowden. It's entitled Permanent Record. In it, his full autobiography, you find out how he got to have the attitude he has, where that courage came from, and then he takes you through the steps how he was able to put it together to find out that it was the American government who was behind it and funding it, together with the billionaires and trillionaires. And throughout the book, we learn a great deal about how this terrible system works, but he also brings in the political element. And you realize that, hey, it's not just the technology, it's the politics. It's a great book. Highly recommend it. It's just out this year. Permanent Record by John Snowden.
Thank you.
Edward Snowden.
Okay. We have one more person, just in front here. Go ahead.
Yes, back to my original statement about photo recognition. Can I be captured and then tracked eventually indefinitely by photo?
Yep.
The second part is I live in a new building that opened in 2013, and the landlord or the owner, through the superintendent, controls the thermostat. should I be suspicious of my thermostat?
Okay. Okay, and I have one very brief question. I was wondering if you could touch on cryptocurrencies. Are they something that is, in fact, sort of anonymous? Are the claims around anonymity with cryptocurrencies true? Do you see a future for that technology?
Just can I add one thing? I was going to know if about the stock market, and if the stock market is monitored extensively, to your knowledge. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to John for final comments.
So, to the first comment, generally in agreement with that. That was my point about political economy, that and the fact that the internet is a large, it's the equivalent of the electrical grid or the water supply, except it's completely in private hands. So the challenge is to put that in public hands and under some form of public democratic control. That you're absolutely right. That's the challenge. I will say that the back end of the internet, huge swaths of it are actually running on Linux, which is open source software. So while most corporate computers and most home computers are running Windows, which is commercial, you're perfectly free to install Linux yourself. If you buy an Apple computer, the underlying operating system is BSD Unix, which is also open source-ish, the Darwin version. So it's not quite as bad as you think it is, but it's still the case that even though the software is open source, that doesn't remove it from the political economy of capitalism. IBM just bought Red Hat Linux, which is one of the big distributors of an open source Linux product, for, I want to say, $1.3 billion. So there's no shortage of money to be made with open source software. So it's, again, technology has no agency in the world. Technology is put at the hands, put in the service of the people that wield it. And the people that have social power can wield technology more effectively than the people that don't have social power. So the organization is not better technology or free technology, although those are good things. The response is organize and bring people together. Facebook alternatives, nothing successful off the top of my head. I mean, there's always something coming down the pike. If you can get your friends to join you on that, cool. But that's always the problem with social networks. The problem for that is to take it away from proprietary platforms and use protocols. It's the same way that anybody can set up a mail server. Most people use these big mail providers, but anybody could set up a mail server because that's an open protocol. When social networks become a protocol that requires interoperability, then it might likely be a response to your question. I'm not aware of an antenna program in Toronto, but that's not the space I play in. Sidewalk lobs, I saw in the coverage today something called their Yellow Book, which is released publicly, so that sets out their goals. And I think their goal, if I read the coverage correctly, might best be interpreted that they want to be the feudal lord for both data and property, that they want to own the whole physical stack right from the ground up and use it as a source for extracting value. Ed Snowden, if you don't want to read the book, watch the Joe Rogan Experience. There's a two-hour Joe Rogan Experience interview with Ed Snowden that came out in the last couple of weeks, and that will give you the sort of live version. It's a very good. But if you want, the permanent record is. I haven't read it yet, but I recommend it. Don, yeah. Once they've got your photo, especially with the government, if you ever had a driver's license, if you ever had any official government photo taken, or if you're ever linked, that's it. One linkage, and it's all through. And the thermostat, possibly, it depends on what kind of thermostat. Cryptocurrencies. The details matter. So the first off thing about cryptocurrencies is that they're built on a horrendous view of the world, the view of a trustless world. That it's one thing. I mean, as an ex-cab driver and otherwise generally suspicious, I still carry around cash and make purchases with cash, as opposed to always with credit cards. But cryptocurrencies have to be very carefully built to provide that same level of anonymity, and the back-end energy cost. Currently the cost of running the Bitcoin network, it's I think north of Portugal in its energy usage. So it's fundamentally anti-ecological and non-sustainable as in that sense. So a lot of that goes back to the industrial. If you've got a smartphone, you're using probably about as much energy as a large inefficient fridge at home, with all the stuff that's going on the back end that at your behest whenever you go to an internet site or do a search, or all the things that you do with this low cost, low battery, all the energy's on the other end. So you're basically paying for the energy consumption of a fridge with your smartphone. So there are privacy-preserving cryptocurrencies, and there are cryptocurrencies that aren't built on mining, that are, I can get get into the technology of that. But at the end of the day, there's a reason in the 19th century when banks issued their own currencies and companies issued their own currencies, that the instability and the risks that were associated with that for the operation of markets, and I don't just mean that in the capitalist sense, but just the financial transactions that people underwent, there was a reason that became centralized under the control of the state. And I very much suspect that the midterm is that there's going to be not Facebook Libra, which is horrifying, but that there will be some form of state regulation of cryptocurrencies to enable stability in financial markets, so that people can use that for transactions. And the stock market, well, of course it's tracked. Well, duh. You know. So, and if you want anonymous transactions, that's what the Bitcoin is more of an investor tool than it is a cash. If you want to do stuff anonymously, start playing with some of the various cryptocurrency offerings and the ICOs in that. That's more likely to be an anonymous investment. But the stock market, oh, that's all truck, brother. All right.
So the cryptocurrency is a way of avoiding the taxman.
Maybe, depending, possibly, depending which one.
Great. I think there was one hand in the back, we're going to end there. Yep, go ahead.
Just quickly, somebody asked about the antenna networks, the mesh networks. The Toronto Mesh is a very active community here in Toronto. I think they're experimenting with a bunch of sites, and it's a full network. So use your favorite search engine to look for Toronto Mesh. They're pretty friendly to newbies, and maybe up some show up to the meeting and learn more. And then Aether is a peer-to-peer social networking application. So it's not centralized like Facebook, it's peer-to-peer. It's called AETHDR.
Great, thank you. All right, any last words, John?
If you're going to organize, there's a startup out of New Zealand that makes software available. It's called Lumio, for groups to achieve decisions online. It's a service that you can pay for. It's also available as a community edition. You can stand up your own server. So if Socialist Action wanted to have faction debates privately, there are options, just as an example, going up to a convention to do that. So I mean, that's one of the reasons I was originally a Trotskyist, was that inside the movement it was understood that people had to be free to disagree to come to a position that then the organization would follow as a whole. But to be able to have those debates, to be able to have those thoughts and express them, you need digital autonomy, which is the exact opposite of what we have now, to Ian's point.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay, thank you very much.